In the 1930s, Albert Einstein was upset with quantum mechanics. He proposed a thought experiment where, according to the theory, an event at one point in the universe could instantaneously affect another event arbitrarily far away. He called this spooky action at a distance because he thought it was absurd. It seemed to imply faster-than-light communication, something his theory of relativity ruled out. But nowadays, we can do this experiment, and what we find is indeed spooky. But in order to understand it, we must first understand spin. All fundamental particles have a property called spin. No, they're not actually spinning, but the analogy is appropriate. They have angular momentum and they have an orientation in space. Now we can measure the spin of a particle, but we have to choose the direction in which to measure it. And this measurement can have only one of two outcomes. Either the particle's spin is aligned with the direction of measurement, which we'll call spin up, or it is opposite the measurement, which we'll call spin down. Now what happens if the particle's spin is vertical, but we measure its spin horizontally? Well then, it has a 50% chance of being spin up and a 50% chance of being spin down. And after the measurement, the particle maintains this spin. So measuring its spin actually changes the spin of the particle. What if we measure spin at an angle 60 degrees from the vertical? Well now, since the spin of the particle is more aligned to this measurement, it will be spin up 3/4 of the time and spin down 1/4 of the time. The probability depends on the square of the cosine of half the angle. Now an experiment like the one Einstein proposed can be performed using two of these particles, but they must be prepared in a particular way. For example, formed spontaneously out of energy. Now since the total angular momentum of the universe must stay constant, you know that if one particle is measured to have spin up, the other, measured in the same direction, must have spin down. I should point out it's only if the two particles are measured in the same direction that their spins must be opposite. Now here's where things start to get a little weird. You might imagine that each particle is created with a definite, well-defined spin. But that won't work, and here's why. Imagine their spins were vertical and opposite. Now, if they're both measured in the horizontal direction, each one has a 50-50 chance of being spin up. So there's actually a 50% chance that both measurements will yield the same spin outcome. And this would violate the law of conservation of angular momentum. According to quantum mechanics, these particles don't have a well-defined spin at all. They are entangled, which means their spin is simply opposite that of the other particle. So when one particle is measured and its spin determined, you immediately know what the same measurement of the other particle will be. This has been rigorously and repeatedly tested experimentally. It doesn't matter at which angle the detectors are set or how far apart they are, they always measure opposite spins. Now just stop for a minute and think about how crazy this is. Both particles have undefined spins, and then you measure one, and immediately you know the spin of the other particle, which could be light years away. It's as though the choice of the first measurement has influenced the result of the second faster than the speed of light, which is indeed how some theorists interpret the result. But not Einstein. Einstein was really bothered by this. He preferred an alternate explanation, that all along the particles contained hidden information about which spin they would have if measured in any direction. It's just that we didn't know this information until we measured them. Now, since that information was within the particles from the moment they formed at the same point in space, no signal would ever have to travel between the two particles faster than light. Now, for a time, scientists accepted this view, that there were just some things about the particles we couldn't know before we measured them. But then along came John Bell with a way to test this idea. This experiment can determine whether the particles contain hidden information all along or not. And this is how it works. There are two spin detectors, each capable of measuring spin in one of three directions. These measurement directions will be selected randomly and independent of each other. Now, pairs of entangled particles will be sent to the two detectors, and we record whether the measured spins are the same, both up or both down, or different. We'll repeat this procedure over and over, randomly varying those measurement directions, to find the percentage of the time the two detectors give different results. And this is the key, because that percentage depends on whether the particles contain hidden information all along or if they don't. Now, to see why this is the case, let's calculate the expected frequency of different readings if the particles do contain hidden information. Now, you can think of this hidden information like a secret plan the particles agree to, and the only criterion that plan must satisfy is that if the particles are ever measured in the same direction, they must give opposite spins. So for example, one plan could be that one particle will give spin up for every measurement direction, and its pair would give spin down for every measurement direction. Or another plan, plan 2, could be that one particle could give spin up for the first direction, spin down for the second direction, and spin up for the third direction, whereas its partner would give spin down for the first direction, spin up for the second direction, and spin down for the third direction. All other plans are mathematically equivalent, so we can work out the expected frequency of different results using these two plans. Here I'm visually representing the particles by their plans, their hidden information. With plan 1, the results will obviously be different 100% of the time. It doesn't matter which measurement directions are selected. But it does for particles using the second plan. For example, if both detectors measure in the first direction, particle A gives spin up while particle B gives spin down. The results are different. But if instead detector B measured in the second direction, the result would be spin up, so the spins are the same. We can continue doing this for all the possible measurement combinations, and what we find is the results are different 5 out of 9 times. So using the second plan, the results should be different 5/9 of the time. And using the first plan, the results should be different 100% of the time. So overall, if the particles contain hidden information, you should see different results more than 5/9 of the time. So what do we actually see in experiment? Well, the results are different only 50% of the time. It doesn't work. So the experiment rules out the idea that all along these particles contain hidden information about which spin they will give in the different directions. So how does quantum mechanics account for this result? Well, let's imagine detector A measures spin in the first direction and the result is spin up. Now immediately you know that the other particle is spin down if measured in the first direction, which should happen randomly 1/3 of the time. However, if particle B is measured in one of the other two directions, it makes an angle of 60 degrees with these measurement directions. And recall from the beginning of this video, the resulting measurement should be spin up 3/4 of the time. Since these measurement directions will be randomly selected 2/3 of the time, particle B will give spin up 2/3 times 3/4 equals half of the time. So both detectors should give the same results half of the time and different results half of the time, which is exactly what we see in the experiment. So quantum mechanics work.
The universe looks less like a big machine than a big thought. Dr. Dean Radin, Chief Scientist, Institute of Noetic Sciences.
Consciousness, this faculty of being sentient, awake, is not limited to our brainwaves or our bodies, but in fact transcends the limits of space-time. It's an unbounded field of awareness. And that is true whether you recognize it or not. Interestingly, it doesn't matter if you intellectualize it. That is the reality of it that has been proven through scientific studies, such as Dr. John's work at Princeton, where they would have people put their awareness on a random number generator that's spitting out zeros and ones randomly, and would intend to shift it, say, towards zeros, and it would shift without any linear wires, just their thought.
Essentially what a random number generator does is it looks at something intrinsically random in the physical world, typically a quantum process, and it converts those into a string of ones and zeros. So you can think of it kind of like a coin flipper where heads is 1 and tails is 0. Now if you collect a large enough sample size, you find a 50-50 distribution of these ones and zeros, meaning physical reality is behaving the way it should. Well, if you get somebody in front of the machine and you ask them to use their intention to mean shift the thing to more ones or more zeros, what you find is that there's, not all the time, but often, a significant mean shift in the direction of their intention. Now that's a very simple experiment, but the implications are absolutely profound.
Between collective consciousness and the physical world.
Sociology studies of meditators, where they go into a community, say you have a town of 200,000 people, and they would send in 1% of the population equivalent, 2,000 people, to go into deep meditation. And they found that emergency room visits declined, violent crimes declined, robberies, all kinds of negative behaviors declined, even though those people didn't even know they were in the city, because there is this resonant effect through the force, if you want to look at it that way. And people who didn't even know these meditators were there became more ordered, more peaceful, more happy, etc., and so on.
This was actually based on the studies done in quantum physics in which a container of helium was cooled down to absolute zero. When only 1% of the helium became aligned to coherent, the entire container went through a phase transition, instantly shifting into coherence and taking on almost magical properties, a state called superfluidity.
So there was this transformation at that 1% point. When a critical mass of people, and whether it's 1% or a fraction of that, depends on the state of consciousness of those who are practicing the meditation or a prayer or coherence. But at that point, you can shift an entire civilization. If we all become coherent, just 1% of us, like a molecule of helium, and we become aligned and coherent and move in the right direction, it will transform the other 99%, even though they don't know that we're doing it. And that's the beauty and the power of the structure of non-locality in consciousness, is that it's all interwoven, but there's enormous power when you're operating at that deeper level of consciousness. And that the intelligence community is very much afraid of, because that's something, A, they cannot control, and B, it would transcend their ability to alter the outcome.
Never leaving this place. I'm doing what you did.
I was wrong. It was fear that kept me here. What are you most afraid of?
Myself.
Ray. Some things are stronger than blood.
Ray, never be afraid of who you are. People keep telling me they know me. I'm afraid no one does. I'd never felt so alone.
You're not alone.
Neither are you. I need someone to show me my place in all this. I'll help you.
You know what you need to do. You know. I miss you, son.
It isn't too late. I did want to take your hand. Ben's hand. Ben.
Son.
Never be afraid of who you are.
There's been an awakening. Have you felt it?
What Palpatine doesn't know.
The life force of your bond
Is where a dyad in the Force ring. Two that are one.
unseen for generations. Power like life itself.
To stop what we both know is coming.
I now seize resolve.
The scavenger girl is no match for the power in me. You failed!
Where there was weakness, strength.
You are nothing.
Not tonight.
The power of two will be one.
You're still holding on!
Let's go!
Force surrounds you.
It grounds you with happiness.
What do you know about the Force?
The Force. It moves through and surrounds every living thing.
It's the energy between all things, a tension, a balance that binds the universe together.
It will guide you.
Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. 1,000 generations live in you now.
Close your eyes.
Breathe. Just breathe.
Feel it. The light. It's always been there.
Now, reach out. What do you see?
Dear child, I see your eyes. You already know the truth. The belonging you seek is not behind you. It is ahead.
No one's ever really gone.
Is hope, the grandeur of trust, desirable? Then human existence must constantly be confronted with insecurities and recurrent uncertainties.
When the storm rages, I find myself asking, why does our faith fail and our prayers seem to go unanswered?
You must trust in your faith and pray earnestly. But also remember, prayer is not a technique of escape from conflict, but rather a stimulus to growth in the very face of conflict.
Can sincere prayers eliminate the storms in life?
Try to envision the real purpose of prayer and pray only for values, not things, for growth, not for gratification.
Why do the innocent suffer?
Being a good person does not protect us from difficulties. However, consider this. The greatest affliction of the cosmos is never to have been afflicted. Mortals only learn wisdom by experiencing tribulation. Much of what a mortal would call good luck might really be bad luck. And the smile of fortune that bestows unearned leisure and undeserved wealth may be the greatest of human afflictions.
How can we overcome our failures and difficulties and succeed?
Don't be discouraged by your failures. Remember, what you are today is not so important as what you are becoming day by day and in eternity. The evolving soul is not made divine by what it does, but by what it strives to do.
What can we do?
You will always have opportunities to do good and be of service, and recognize that one must do something as well as be something. Live loyally today, grow, and tomorrow will attend to itself. The quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog is to live loyally each moment as a tadpole. And fail not to remember that the will of God can be done in any earthly occupation.
What if we fall short?
Keep perspective and do not be troubled. Failure is simply an educational episode, a cultural experiment in the acquirement of wisdom. And defeat is the true mirror in which you may honestly view your real self.
What if it feels like all hope is lost?
Hope is never truly lost. Have faith, confidence in the eventual triumph of divine justice and eternal goodness. You may be surrounded with small enemies and be retarded by many obstacles, but the big things and the real things of this world and the universe are on your side. In liaison with God, nothing, absolutely nothing, is impossible.